Have you ever wondered why your film or your story sucks? No, it wasn't because of the amount of actors, low budget, or the fact you shot it all on a Canon 700D. Of course, there is loads of different areas of film you should be looking to perfect, but this is something that often is overlooked as things like writing, cinematography, and story are the face of filmmaking. However, without this, the rest is nothing. So what is it? The answer is structure. Structure is crucial to any story success. You can have all the beautiful cinematography, witty dialogue, fantastic acting, but without structure, it's all for nothing. Structure is what keeps your film interesting and how you hold your viewer's attention. A film without structure is like a map with no markings. How are you going to know where you are going? What way do you go? What obstacles do we need to get past to get to the ending? In the same way as we need a map to find the treasure, we also need structure to know how our story goes. I mean, technically you can do it without a map, but your job becomes a lot harder. Same with structure. Structure is a tool able to help you writing your story and producing a film that holds your viewer's attention. So how do we use structure? What is key to remember is that structure won't make your film an instant Oscar winner. However, I do believe this is the first thing you should be thinking about once you have the ideas of your story together. Whether you have a character or an idea for a story, you should apply it to a film structure. So perhaps the most notorious known structure in any storytelling is the 3-act structure. This has been used for hundreds of years, for thousands of different stories. There are many interpretations of the 3-act structure, including Sid Field's book screenplay, Joseph Campbell and The Hero's Journey, Robert McKee's story, and Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. Despite its many interpretations, they all have and want the same answer: to create a story that is interesting and making it easy to write. The 3-act structure plays on the idea of your story having a beginning, middle, and end. Something I imagine you have heard of. Instead of beginning, middle, and end, it's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1, the setup. Act 2, the confrontation. Act 3, the climax. The structure is meant to allow you to lay out your story in a timeline, as well as follow a narrative to keep your audience interested. Keeping your narrative and the story moving is key to writing something that won't bore your audience. Every scene you write needs to mean something. If you have a scene that doesn't go anywhere, your audience is going to lose interest. Each scene needs to drive the story forward one way or another. This is why we need story structure. A good example of this is in Prison Break Season 1. Once the story gets going, it does a fantastic job at never stopping still. Each episode, and more specifically each scene, pushes the story forward until it is moving like a Union Pacific big boy steam locomotive. The amount of plot twists, all-time low, plot points, cliffhanger moments are insane, and it proves how a good structure and smart writing can make a story such a success. I'm going to go over a really basic explanation of the 3-act structure and show examples of films and scenes that utilize it. Act 1, the setup. Act 1 is split into 3 parts: a strong opener, inciting incident, and plot point 1. A strong opener, also known as a flashbang opener, is all about getting your audience hooked and invested into your characters and story. Your opening scene should be something interesting. Every good film you've ever watched will have a strong opener. An example of this is in Skyfall. Skyfall opens with the hunt for a hard drive and an intense chase between our protagonist, Bond, and some bad guy. What's key to notice here is how the narrative keeps moving. It's not just how good guy chases bad guy. Constantly new problems occur which both of them have to tackle. It goes from a car chase to stealing bikes, riding them along a rooftop, before ditching the bikes and ending up on the train. Even on the train, the problems develop. We see Bond run out of ammo and proceed to use a digger as a counter-attack. This is what makes the scene interesting, the narrative and how it's structured. New problems keep developing and the narrative never stops still. What makes this scene isn't good guy versus bad guy, it's good guy versus bad guy with a scene full of creative action and a narrative that doesn't stop still. As fantastic as this opening is, you don't need a car chase, bank robbery, or any crazy action-packed scene to have a strong opening. This isn't necessary. Your opening should include meeting some sort of protagonist, the world they live in, and some sort of problem. Remember, this doesn't have to be a car chase or shootout. This could be as simple as an argument or being at the wrong address. Inciting incident. Inciting incident is what is known as the catalyst or call to adventure. It's when our protagonist is called to adventure, meaning they have a problem to solve. It usually comes up around the 10-15 minute mark into the film, and the problem usually links with the main plot. In Jaws, this is when they discover the body, sparking the investigation of what happened to Chrissy. The protagonist doesn't necessarily have to take up the opportunity. In fact, it's quite common they refuse the problem, and then something will happen because they didn't take up this opportunity, causing even more problems. Later in Jaws, we see because they didn't take serious action when finding the body, it allows the shark another opportunity to strike again. Which leads me to plot point 1. The second shark attack is plot point 1. Plot point 1 is what sends our plot into a new direction and takes the story into Act 2. Our plot point 1, either at this moment or as a result of this moment, our protagonist decides to take on the problem which takes us into Act 2. Plot point 1 is often a result of your character's decision at the inciting incident. An example of this is when the Empire burned Luke's parents alive. He discovers them, and this is what motivates him to join the rebellion against the Empire. Act 2 is split into 2 parts. Part 1 is fun and games, and part 2 is known as Things Get Serious. Part 1 is a part where the tone is very lighthearted. Things like montages, preparation, discovering new characters, powers, abilities, and anything else needed to set up the rest of the story is found here. This part is very lighthearted in tone, hence why it's called Fun and Games. An example of this is in Kings of Summer, when they already ran away and they had begun building their house. We can identify this as Fun and Games because of its very light tone and the fact they are building the house, which is the main plot. Midpoint. This is when the plot changes direction. Usually this is a failure, success, or revelation. Whatever happens, it shifts the dynamic of the story and the direction of the plot. It's what takes us from fun and games to things get serious. In Hunt for the Wilder People, this is when they realise they are on the run, and it's thought that the uncle is a paedophile. As much as the film is a comedy, we see that the consequences and the journey they're on take a much harsher and darker tone. After the midpoint, we're taken into part 2, where things get serious. This is the part where the tone of the film changes. The shift in dynamic is from all happy jokey to, bro, did you seriously just talk during independent reading time? In Avengers Infinity War, this is when all war breaks out defending the stone in Wakanda. All-time low. Also known as a false defeat, this is the part where something bad happens and it feels like all is lost. This could be a death, relationship breakup, or a deep betrayal. In The Dark Knight, this is the part where Rachel dies and the Joker escapes. Dark Knight of the Soul. Dark Knight of the Soul is easy to find because the scene is as sad as the bit where Lenny dies in the mice. Dark Knight of the Soul is all about how your characters feel mentally as a result of what happened at the all is lost moment. All is lost is the physical part, while Dark Knight of the Soul is the mental part, caused by the all is lost scene. Often this scene is followed by some sort of pep talk from someone close to the protagonist. So following Rachel's death and the Joker being back on the streets, we see the mental take it has on Batman. With this comes Alfred's pep talk to try and re-inspire Batman. Plot point 2. This part again is what changes the direction of the plot, and is what sends us into Act 3. After everything going south, this is usually the part where the protagonist decides he's going to fix things. An example of this is when Canyon decides he wanted to fix Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club. An actual example is when Shrek finds out Fiona wasn't talking about him, and he decides to go after Fiona and the wedding, launching us into Act 3, where they go after Fiona. Act 3, the climax. Act 3 is usually the shortest act of the 3, usually including 2 main parts, the climax and the resolution. However, before both of these sometimes comes a twist. The twist is a way to keep the final act interesting. It's usually something like a false defeat or a revelation. So one of the characters says something like, no, that's not how we attack the ship. We need to attack it with freshly wetted ship. An example of a twist is in Star Wars A New Hope, where Han Solo comes back. The climax is the creme de la creme moment. This is exactly what the film has been leading up to, and this should be the most exciting part of the story. An example of this is pretty much any movie ever when the bad guy gets caught or killed, or even when our protagonist loses. The climax can be a happy ending or a tragedy. For example, when they kill the shark in Jaws. In Lady Bird, this is when she moves to New York. When Vader chucks Palpatine away. In Titanic, when the boat sinks. Or when Rocky loses. After the climax, we have the resolution. This is when we answer any final questions, loose ends, or any remaining tensions in the film. This gives our audience a satisfying ending, as well as time to take a breath after the high tensions during the climax. An example of this is the ending of Lady Bird, where we see the mother and daughter forgive each other. She accepts her name and religion. In Dunkirk, this is when they arrive home and the plane lands. Just to run through everything again clearly, I'll show you how Star Wars A New Hope follows the 3-act structure to a T. Act 1, strong opener. Triangle shoots at small ship. We're in space and we meet our current protagonists, R2 and Quagmire. Inciting incident. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Plot point 1. Luke's aunt and uncle are dead, which makes Luke join the rebellion and learn the Force. Act 2. Part 1, fun and games. We go to Mos Eisley, meet Han Solo and Chewbacca before running away from the Empire. Midpoint. They get sucked into the Death Star. Part 2. Things get serious. All is lost. Obi-Wan dies. Dark Knight of the Soul. Luke is sad. Pep talk. Leia tries to cheer him up. Act 3. Twist. Han Solo comes back. Climax. They take down the Death Star. Resolution. They are rewarded with medals. It's genius, right? Well, what if I told you there was a better, more modernized, and simplified version of the 3-act structure? Something different. Introducing Dan Harmon's story circle. The story circle plays on the idea of the circle of life, and the idea that everything needs balance. The circle is made up of 8 steps, and Dan believes it can be used to tell a story in any form of media. The top half of the circle represents start/finish, while the bottom half represents growth/change. Harmon says every story has a rhythm, which he believes can be portrayed by these 3 dualities. The first being life/death, the idea that you're alive and then one day you die. Your body is decomposed by the earth, giving back to the planet, meaning the planet relies on the idea of life and death. Then we have conscious and unconscious. Upstairs in your conscious, things are comfortable, bright and happy. Unconscious is uncomfortable, darker and much freakier. The stuff you wouldn't normally dive into. But as human beings, our desires such as pleasure, sanity and life depend on the occasional trip to the unknown. These trips can all be done through therapy, meditation, confession, sex, violence, or in fact, a good story. All keeping the conscious and stable working order, which brings us to order/chaos. Society's longevity also depends on this journey into the unknown and returning with new ideas, otherwise we will not develop or move forward. Almost all stories follow this pattern of descent and return, diving and emerging. Harmon says, all life, including the human mind and the communities we create, marches to the same specific beat. If the story matches to this beat, it will resonate. It will send an audience ego on a brief trip to the unconscious and back. The audience has an instinctive taste for all that, and they're going to say yum. What he's saying is, we can make the unconscious trip through stories, therefore satisfying ourselves. So now that we've understood the theory of the story circle, here it is in action. The story circle is made up of 8 parts. 1. You, a character is in a zone of comfort. 2. Need, they want something. 3. Go, they enter an unfamiliar situation. 4. Search, adapt to it. 5. Find, get what they wanted. 6. Take, pay a heavy price for it. 7. Return, then return to their familiar situation. 8. Change, having changed. Each semicircle has an important meaning crossing from one side to the other. The semicircles being right to left and top to bottom. Top to bottom, you portray the moment that the hero enters a new situation and is forced to adapt, while the second line, bottom right to bottom left, is the inner fight within a hero. Once the hero crosses this dividing line, the hero finally faces their fears and tries to overcome their mental well-being. So let's put this into example. Introducing the greatest movie ever, Shrek. 1. You, establish a protagonist. We meet Shrek a minute in as he comes out to Grammy-winning song All-Star by Drizzy Drake. 2. Need. Something ain't quite right, things aren't perfect. We see that Shrek is a twisted psychopath that he scares away innocent men just so he can have some peace and quiet. We also see him push away Donkey despite him taking an interest in Shrek unlike anyone else. We then see how lonely Shrek really is, and this is where his needs are. He just doesn't realise how lonely he is. 3. Go. Crossing the threshold. After Farquaad forces the freak show, brackets, animals and creatures, to live in Shrek's swamp, Shrek decides enough is enough, and he and Donkey begin the adventure to find Lord Farquaad. 4. Search. Road of trials, adapt, and experiment. We see Shrek and Donkey head to Duloc. They interrupt Farquaad's speech where he is looking for his champion knight by brutally murdering all the knights. Shrek and Farquaad cut a deal to search for the princess in order for Shrek to be given his land back. 5. Find. Meeting with the goddess. They find the dragon. They find Princess Fiona, who Shrek at the time believes she is purely just a step in getting him back his swamp. 6. Take. Meet your maker. When Donkey dies, Shrek realizes the monster he's become. Okay, it's actually when Donkey discovers Fiona's secret that she is actually an ogre at night. As Shrek is on his way to give her a flower, he overhears Fiona talking about how ugly she is because she's an ogre. Shrek believes this is about him, so understandably, he storms off and fetches Lord Farquaad. 7. Return. Bring it home. Shrek then returns home, empty-handed, no princess, no donkey, exactly what he originally wanted. However, now he knows deep down, this isn't what he wanted. 8. Change. Master of both worlds, top and bottom half. After Donkey and Shrek argue some more, Shrek finally finds out Fiona wasn't on about him, but someone else. Shrek accepts his new self and feelings. Shrek, Donkey, and the dragon now go after the wedding so Shrek can get his true love. After slaying the king, Shrek takes his place and marries Fiona, and we see him quite literally become master of both worlds. And circle complete. The circle can apply to any part of the story. For example, characters, tones, theme. Harmon believes all recognisable stories come back to this structure, which is why it might be better than the 3-act structure, and the reason you're thinking, why this man spent 16 minutes explaining the 3-act structure when there's a better version? While it's actually obvious, we all have our own preferences. For me, the 3-act structure feels much clearer than the story circle. I find it easier to structure and write to you, while as much as I understand the story circle, I find it a little bit less clear to write and structure my story with. I find the 3-act easier, you might prefer the story circle. It's old school versus new school. Which brings me to the question, is the 3-act structure still relevant in modern cinema? Short answer, yes, but actually no. It certainly isn't as meta as perhaps 80 years ago, but it's still used in huge films such as Avengers, Star Wars, and Batman. You could argue it is perhaps a more mainstream way of structuring a film, while in more indie films you'll see much more different alternative structures. This is because of the fact the 3-act structure is such a classic way of creating a film. Any film that wants to be different in order to stand out is going to use a different method. As well, it's not even about trying to stand out. The 3-act structure is very saturated, but not to the point where it's unbearable, more to the fact that it's seen as a very much standard way to make a movie. Huge mainstream films follow the 3-act structure because of this. To the huge mainstream audience, it is a huge risk going for a different style of structure. Remember, film is a business and these films need to make their money. Because the mainstream audience is so wide in age range and types of people, it would be a huge risk creating something with a structure that is a little more complex or hard to follow, as some people will love it and some people hate it. If teens come out of a film after the first day release calling it terrible because the ending was at the start, the chances of their mates going to watch it are much slimmer. This mixed in with the modern power of social media is another element to why mainstream films will continue to follow the quote-unquote standard structure. When your audience is that big doing something different, it's such a risk because of the chance of the average audience member wanting to see a film that has a beginning, middle, end with a happy ending, compared to the chances of someone wanting to see a Rashomon structure where the story is told from multiple different perspectives. However, big filmmakers such as Quentin Tarantino often use different structures such as non-linear. Pulp Fiction, one of, if not Tarantino's biggest film, has a non-stop linear structure, meaning the story does not go A to B and the story jumps about back and forth in time. Pulp Fiction doesn't follow the traditional 3-act, yet it's still a hugely popular film. There's most certainly room for all structures in modern cinema. There are loads of different structures you can research, but I do believe the 3-act structure is the most infamous and classic way of telling a story. Anyone knows what a story is, knows the idea of beginning, middle and end. The setup, confrontation and climax. Even if you're not fully aware of what the 3-act structure is, you know its very basic qualities. So, is the 3-act structure still relevant in modern cinema? The answer is yes, it is. It's still the most popular structure by far, with most movies in modern cinema using it. You can argue that it's only because they are scared of not making their money back, which definitely has some truth to it, but I do believe the chance of the 3-act structure going anywhere is very slim. Even huge films like Pulp Fiction that don't follow it, I feel the audience of that is very different to a film like Avengers. Avengers has a much wider mainstream audience, while Pulp Fiction has a more mature, young adult audience. The 3-act structure is such a classic and notorious way of telling a story that I really don't see anything bettering that beginning, middle and end structure. Sure, it's great to see a film like Pulp Fiction come onto the scene with a completely different structure, but the chance of non-linear becoming the go-to meta way of making a film just doesn't seem feasible. I do think the 3-act structure has evolved and changed over the last 100 years, with loads of different interpretations and methods surfacing. Because it has evolved is one of the reasons it has stayed relevant. If we saw the exact same structure in film as we did 100 years ago, it most probably would feel very boring and predictable. As much as it's the same structure, we see different ways it is used and different director or writer adaptations. Whether it's Jaws not using the resolution part of the 3-act, or me deciding I don't want a midpoint, both our films are still the 3-act structure, just adapted, which is what makes them interesting and different. Which brings me on to my next point. Remember, the 3-act structure is a tool to help you get through the walls of writing. Believe every film and story needs structure, otherwise writing it's going to be very difficult and frustrating. The 3-act structure is purely just another tool to try bypass this. You can adapt it as much as you like, use it the exact way it's laid out, but at the end of the day it's up to you because you are the writer. You are the creative here, and whether you want to follow a structure exactly, combine two of them, adapt it your way, that is completely fine. There is no set in stone way to tell a story correctly. In fact, there is no rules in writing. You can break them as much as you want. You are the writer and the creator of telling your story. How you want to tell it is up to you. The 3-act is a tool made to help storytelling easier, but at the end of the day, it's about how you decide to tell your story. That's what will make it unique. New structures and methods will emerge, such as Dan's story circle did. Whether that will one day become more popular than the 3-act structure, I guess we'll find out. The 3-act structure is certainly relevant to modern cinema, but that doesn't mean it's the route to a good story. So whether you're telling a story to your future children, your mates, or even a packed out cinema, storytelling is not going anywhere, and I think structuring it is the first step to making it a good one.